Hemant, what an absolute pleasure to have you join us here at the conclave. Thank you very much for your time. I know it's been a busy schedule for you as well, so we appreciate you being here this morning. Let's start by talking to you about India, Hemant, and where you see India at this point in time in the context of the kind of investments you're making. As Chandra pointed out, you've got a war chest of $8 billion that you're putting to use. So let's start with the bet on India.
Yeah, look, we're extremely bullish on the opportunity here. One of the main reasons is around this whole thesis we have called global resilience. And if you think about what the world's gone through over the last few years with pandemic, wars, energy crises, all the polarization, every country is thinking about how to make their core industries resilient. And to us, those industries are defense, healthcare, financial services, energy, industrials. These are the same industries we focus on in the US with that same lens as well. And, with the growth market here, and the decoupling that's happening between the West and China, India's got an amazing opportunity to be a leader in that. And so the timing is fantastic in that regard. And the other thing I would say is, last few years, some of the IPOs that have happened, I think that's aspirational for the entrepreneurial community here to go do more of that. And so entrepreneurs feel ready, the geopolitics of it is ready, and the country itself is in a high growth phase. So from our standpoint, it's quite interesting.
You talked about IPOs, and let's talk about the big one, which has just happened, and that's Swiggy. And I'll start by talking to you about quick commerce, because that's a bet that you're doubling down on here in India. You've invested in Zepto, which is, of course, now moved to Bengaluru as well. What's the bet on quick commerce? Why is it that quick commerce as a business model has worked here in India? It's being now touted as the big Make in India for the world story, perhaps, at least to start with, Make in India for India story. In fact, Adit Palicha calling it the next big UPI-like moment for India. Why do you believe quick commerce is uniquely working in India and your bet on it?
Well, look, first of all, it's a great consumer experience. So when I talk to folks everywhere I travel in India, and wherever the service is available, I generally hear very delighted customers. And I think the reason it's interesting for us is not only because quick commerce itself is a good experience, but the infrastructure that's getting built as a result of it, to your point about UPI, is quite profound. And that team, I'm a student of founders that build category-defining companies. I just think Adit and team are incredible, and their aspirations are to think much more beyond quick commerce in terms of what they're trying to build. And we're excited to be part of it.
Let's talk about AI now. And most people that we've been speaking to, companies that are in the midst of driving their own AI capabilities and capacities, as well as people who are on the outside looking at where things stand. And the consensus view is that we're at the infancy of an AI supercycle. How do you see things playing out from here?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you look at it. You would actually say a lot of this started in 2007 when you had iPhone, Facebook Connect, and Amazon Web Services all getting put together, and you went down this digitization of society. That's sort of when it started. And that led to a lot of aggregation of data in the cloud. You started activating AI capabilities that have been around for decades. And it was big data, then it was machine learning, and then with enough data and compute, you were able to activate the transformers. So one way you could say is actually a continuum.
Yeah.
On the other side, you would say the activation of the language models is an interesting discontinuous moment, and it has some pretty profound implications. And we kind of look at every industry, every business function, and how is it fundamentally going to transform with applied AI, sort of leveraging these tools. And some of the progress we're making in the US with our companies, it's stunning how fast.
Give me examples.
So we do a lot of work in healthcare. It's about 20% of what we do. Over the last year, we have deployed the Scribe tools, and it's in the middle of being deployed in the largest health system in the country, HCA, through a company that I started several years ago called Commure. And we also have a company called Hippocratic AI that's building an agentic nurse. And nurses in the US used to cost $90 an hour, and Hippocratic actually gives you a fully automated, empathetic agentic nurse at $9 an hour. Transforms how health systems actually think about care models for their team. These are all being deployed enterprise-wide. Most of AI in the enterprise is stuck in pilots, and there's reasons for that. But there are some examples like this that give me a lot of hope that I think as we figure out the deployment models, this stuff's going to impact the adoption of AI quite fast.
So where are we, going from the pilot to actual deployment? Are we closer to that breakout point, the breakout moment?
It depends. So here's the way I think about the problem. At the base level, you have foundational models. There's a lot of capital going in. You've got 6 or 7 folks, and we can debate if India should have its own or not, but there's a lot of capital sort of creating that. Then you have small models being built on top that are industry specific. So Hippocratic was an example of a healthcare model. We're actually doing it in media because that industry wants a clean model. You got biology, sort of every industry. Then you have to think about, do you have the data infrastructure that can deploy these models into the enterprise? And then you say, well, if all that is true, you're essentially introducing an AI workforce, a set of agents sitting next to a set of humans, metaphorically. And if that's what's happening, what is the workflow going to look like in a company? What does a culture look like? Those are complex topics.
Yeah.
So everybody's doing POCs, but there's a reason why this stuff hasn't been deeply penetrated, except where a few of us are going and sort of taking a system-wide view. But over the next few years, this is where I think progress is going to get made.
You preempted my question, so let me ask you that. The comment that you just made, should India work on having its own LLM? What kind should we actually focus on?
Yeah, so I had this really interesting conversation with one of the business leaders here in India, and he said, rupee was 35 rupees to a dollar in 1990, and today it's mid-80s. Yeah. And that's for the simple reason that we don't have our own energy here. And I think if you take the long view and you said you're not going to have your own intelligence infrastructure or compute infrastructure, that problem is going to keep perpetuating. So if you take the long view, I do think India needs to think about its own infrastructure, all the way from semiconductors to foundation models. Now, it's not ready to do all of that today. So I think this has to be a long game, and the right industry and the government itself needs to be thinking about how do we really get there, because otherwise there will be a disadvantage as this technology really starts to power more and more of the economy.
We're probably sitting here in the midst of a lot of startups as well, and this takes me back to, I think, a piece that you and Fareed did for HBR, where you talk about whether startups can actually thrive in an AI era. So let me toss that across to you. Given the fact that at this point in time, the power is being leveraged by big tech, and big tech is really driving the AI game, I mean, what room do startups have to play with?
Yeah, so we wrote that piece because of the observation that when ChatGPT happened, one of the most valuable use cases was actually code generation. And who, from a market share perspective, owns that today? Microsoft with GitHub Copilot. Obviously, there's a bunch of startups we're investing as well. But the value accrued to a big company, not a little company, on a new technological shift. Yeah. So in Silicon Valley, one way to look at our business is we basically fund engineers in different clusters called startups. And the advantage of sort of getting there from an innovation standpoint on infrastructure, if that's accruing to the big companies, well, what are these startups going to do? But on the other side, actually, I'm pretty bullish that AI is not a distribution advantage, it's a transformation advantage, right? Going and transforming labor, workforce, these businesses like I talked about a few minutes ago. So I think the opportunity is changing for what the entrepreneurs need to be doing. It needs to be much more about working with industry and transforming it, as opposed to trying to build tooling infrastructure only, because I do think there the big companies will fundamentally have advantage, because they have the compute, they have the customers, they have the data, they have the capital. So it's the startup advantage in that dimension actually erodes, but in this other dimension, there's a lot to do, and that's a lot of where we're focused, and we call that the applied AI category.
So how's that weighing on the kind of investments that you're making, not just here in India, specific to, of course, the AI bets that you're making, but globally as well?
I want to go back to that matrix that I mentioned, which is what are the language models that we need that are industry specific to transform those industries, and how should work itself get transformed in the enterprise? What is a modern AI marketing department? What does a modern call center look like? What does a modern legal department look like?
Does it have any people?
Well, I think it depends. Some of these are going to be fully automated, and some will have, a human interaction with the agents. And our view is that these AI native enterprises are going to become a thing. These are massive ideas. Like the Hippocratic example I gave, the market opportunity for that in the US is bigger than all of SaaS software combined. All SaaS companies, because you're talking about literally all of labor that's serving the healthcare industry. So these are massive opportunities. I think they're going to create concentrated winners. But we're heavily bullish that that's a place where startups can have an important role. And everywhere in the last 40 years, labor was offshored. And I think the IT services industry, the call center industry, everybody has to think about this. AI is going to onshore that back in terms of productivity to the Western nations. And that is the opportunity these companies have in front of them.
Well, that's the opportunity, but that also presents by way of challenges to the existing business models that play out. You brought up the onshore-offshore example as just one of them. But Hemant, let's talk about what happens to jobs now in the context of AI agents and so on and so forth. And at this point in time, industry is saying, look, we're not going to do away with jobs. Jobs are going to be replaced. They're going to be repositioned. They're going to be reimagined. But for somebody who is coming out of an engineering college today as a coder, what should they prepare themselves for? What should we brace ourselves for in terms of what the job market is going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years?
So this is a very complicated question because it's always clear in the short term, it's somewhat clear in the medium term, and then human imagination can't really figure that out in the long term.
Let's start with the short term, because in the long term, we don't know where we're going to be.
Yeah, exactly. So short term, there's a shortage of engineers that know how to do this. I actually think a 10x AI engineer will look different from a 10x traditional software engineer in the way you sort of use these technologies to build products. So there's a whole new category of workforce that needs to emerge. In the medium term, a lot of our core industries, if you think about physicians, nurses, teachers, there's a huge shortage of talent to serve them. If you think about taking care of our elderly folks, we don't have a workforce for that. In the US, we think a lot about how do you create that. Mental health, we don't have a workforce that really focuses on that. So I think jobs are going to evolve. And you'll say where it's about productivity, you use AI. Where it's about empathy and human interaction, you're going to end up creating more sort of human jobs. So there's a transformational workforce that's going to happen in the next 15, 20, 25 years. In the long term, who knows? We'll see where else our human ingenuity takes us that these machines maybe can't.
Okay, that's short term. Medium to long term, what should be the bets that policymakers, that governments, that academic institutions make to sort of reimagine what this potential future could look like?
I think you have to assume that a lot of the middle class that got created because of offshoring labor is going to go away. Just economics and market forces are such that that's going to get impacted. So the question is, how do you upskill as a nation, to make them be technologically more advanced? I think the current course and speed, otherwise you just have better ways to do these things and much cheaper ways to do things because, compute costs go to zero over time. So I think there is a real important focus there. We have a company that is serving automating call centers. We're actually buying call centers and then AI enabling them, and that leads to a lot of job loss in those markets. Think about countries like Philippines and others. And we are concerned about that. We actually want to work with those governments saying, well, what are you going to do with these people? Because if we don't do it, somebody else will. Market forces are such that these jobs are going to be onshored with AI productivity. So then what are we actually going to do to upskill these folks to create more local opportunity? And I do think the government and business needs to work together in thinking through that.